Welcome to the world of Oklahoma's education, starring none other than State Superintendent Ryan Walters. Hold on tight because this guy's been spinning more tales than a wizard at Hogwarts. Today, we're throwing some serious shade on Superintendent Walters, so hold on to your textbooks. Walters has been lying through his teeth about the Freedom from Religion Foundation. His claims that they want to snatch away religious freedom, total fiction. And that funded by George Soros bit, not even close to reality. Join us as we crank up the volume on the call for Walters' resignation, setting the record straight on FFRF's commitment to constitutional principles and the call for Walters to exit stage left. Buckle up, it's about to get real. This story is from FFRF.org and it's written by Dan Barker and Annie Laurie Gaylor on November 29th, 2023. So this it was more of an open letter than it was an article. And so this letter was written by Dan Barker and Annie Laurie Gaylor, who are co-presidents of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. And their letter specifically mentions some recent attacks on them by Ryan Walters. For example, he said that the FFRF is, quote, seeking to take away the religious freedom of Oklahoma students, and that they are, quote, funded by George Soros. Well, of course they are, right? Of course they are. Their letter also recounts many of their recent squabbles that the FFRF has had that has brought to Walters' attention, promoting Christianity by calling for the posting of the 10 Commandments, scapegoating atheism in recent social media posts made with public accounts, claiming that they are promoting state-sponsored atheism, publishing a video via his office calling for the banning of 190 books on the American Library Association's Rainbow Book List, claiming that they contain graphic pornography. I think we've heard that before. Suggesting students should be taught from the Christian Bible, supporting the establishment of the nation's first religious charter school, and also for threatening retaliation against the Tulsa Public School Board for stopping a board member from reading a prayer at the graduation ceremony. That last one, by the way, was largely directed against the interim superintendent of Tulsa Public Schools, Dr. Ebony Johnson. She offered a counter memo to defend herself and her district employees, but it goes a bit astray from what we're discussing here. So I'll put the full link to that full TPS memo into the show notes. So the letter ends, of course, then with Dan Barker and Annie Laurie Gaylor calling for Ryan's resignation. So Eli, tell us, what's your take on this letter here?
Yeah, I think this letter is kind of badass. Honestly, I loved reading this because it was kind of like a fight me challenge written by like a lawful neutral paladin of public relations. I love how many different ways they reiterated, like, hey, by the way, this is a crime and you're not allowed to do that. And you're absolutely not allowed to do this. And the video was supposed to be, Ryan Walters' video was supposed to be his sort of like posturing, like grandstand Mullen Lob kind of, defiant last stand against the FFRF. And they're basically just like, okay, whatever, like you're still committing crimes. So like, we'll see you in court. And I like how Superintendent Walters also says, we will not allow atheism to be the state-sponsored religion of Oklahoma. So he doesn't think that Oklahoma shouldn't have a state-sponsored religion. He doesn't understand why you should keep those two things separate. He just thinks that, well, it can't be atheism. It must be Christianity. It's super duper not the point also, but it really bugs me when people call atheism a religion. Like we were just talking about this a little bit ago. It's just not that. And it's, and I think on one of last week's shows, it was mentioned as well.
But you're preaching to the choir here.
Right. Yeah, I know we all know that. Right. So when the FFRF says, no, you can't broadcast a prayer through school to a captive audience of minors who don't have the knowledge or legal capacity to consent, people like Ryan Walters who see, not having a religion as a religion, they see that as, oh, you nasty little Christian kids better not even think about the cross in my schools. And that's just not what's happening. And people like Ryan Walters want to present it that way and have this whole, Christian persecution and war on Christmas is a similar, vein that people take this down all the time when it's about this Christian persecution that just doesn't exist in the United States. Phoebe, what do you think?
I'm bored with it all. I'm absolutely bored to the back teeth with it all.
All right, so infidel, what do you think then?
Absolute bloody life, people. I mean, really, do you have nothing better to do in your job, in your life? I mean, seriously, mate, get a hobby. Stop worrying about things you have no control over, such as what other people do in their 1 square foot of real estate. What are you bothering for? I understand that you believe in, Christo-fascism and Project 2025, subjects we've talked about on this before. But I mean, for crying out loud, this is prima facie unconstitutional garbage. And for him not to know that is disingenuous at best. And for him to know it and carry on doing it is hypocrisy and idiocy. And this is designed not to try to do what he wants to do. Oh, no. He's pushing the envelope and the Overton window that little bit further. When you have something as outrageous as this, the people that are doing it, generally speaking, know what they're doing. They're not there to try to push whatever they want to push. Completely. They want to push the needle slightly further and keep pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing that needle. Moving that Overton window gradually across. So that eventually, when you push back and go, what the are you doing, you absolute maniacal horse-manured piece of turd?
As you do.
Naturally.
People go, we've been doing this for years. It reminds me of a court case, slightly off topic here, but it reminds me of a court case which was about student loans and bankruptcy. I mean, in my day job, I read this case because it was a fascinating case. And the judge turned around and said, since the 1970s, judges have done something called add their own judicial gloss to the way that it's done. And judge after judge after judge after judge after judge after judge had just built upon this thing. So this judge went all the way back to the beginning and went, well, that's actually what it says, and this guy was wrong. What they want you to do is they want you to be the judge at the end who's building off of the gloss and not realizing that the very first person to do this was wrong. And that's how they move the Overton window. By people not realizing that they've got something in and got away with something that they shouldn't be. And that's what's dangerous about that. And when I say I'm bored, it's because I've seen this playbook 105 million times before. Every single time I hear of some anti-twerks-a-lot religious idiot stripping someone from student councils, or some other person saying we must have the 10 Commandments in the Supreme Court grounds of Alabama. We've seen it all before. And it's just boring that we're still fighting these goons, infidel.
Oftentimes we're fighting the same goons. This guy.
Are you saying it's the Emperor's New Clothes?
Well, this guy in particular, he's done this game before. We did an episode on him in September about claiming the separation of church and state were a myth. So he's been hammering away at this for quite a while.
Is it God's kingdom? Is it God's kingdom?
Well, of course, because he's wanting his version of God's kingdom. Because I do believe that Walters is a true believer.
In what, though?
I think he wants to bring about a theocracy. Now, what that means is going to vary according to who's saying it. Because each theist wants their version of theism to be the one that rules.
It's the Pope.
You know, and the Pope right now is just trying to remain relevant. But this guy here, you know, his problem is I get he has a truth problem, It really is. He has a problem telling the truth. You know, his effort to get the Catholic charter school through into the Supreme Court and involve himself with that is something that on more than one occasion the courts have told him no, even up to the state Supreme Court level have told him, no, you really don't have anything to do with this. But he's such a diehard, he's such a true believer that he's wanted to interject himself into it anyway. Now, whether he's successful, I agree with you. This is a matter of pushing that envelope. You push, you get a little more. That's exactly what they did with Roe versus Wade for a long time. They're doing the same thing here. They're trying to get what they can get, and the way you do that is to go extreme. You know, the go big or go home type of mentality. But for this guy, this is at least the fourth time we've covered him, and I don't think it's going away, because as long as we have this group of people who believe that, you know, atheists are having a major supply chain issue and they're, you know, sourcing new babies in Oklahoma, you know, the Jews are funneling money through George Soros, and you know, as long as people believe that, they're going to believe anything, and they hear that behind pulpits time and time and time again, and these things are reinforced that they need someone to take dominion. They even call them dominionists, and that's what's going on here. He wants a theocracy, and to him the Constitution is simply an inconvenience. He doesn't want it anymore. Now, Scott, what's your take on him, really?
Well, you mentioned that we've talked about him before, and yes, sadly, that's the case. This is not a show that the subject matter would be desirable to get on, right? That doesn't mean you're doing well in our eyes, I guess.
Yes.
Well, no, that's not always true. We do give some people props sometimes, but
you should get a little award from us, you know, most
right, like a 5-timers club, something like that,
yeah,
right?
You see.
All right. No, but you were talking about how he thought the separation of church and state was a myth. But if that were true, then doesn't that kind of undermine his argument against the state-sponsored atheism thing? I mean, if he's calling atheism a religion and he's saying religion and church are not necessarily, I don't know.
But it's not his religion.
On the state-sponsored atheism thing, okay, so we've heard this 1,000 times before from people across, you know, all nations and whatnot. But there's a difference between an atheistic state and a secular state. There is a difference, and so I wanted to ask the panel what their thoughts on. So I want to know the difference between a secular government and a state-sponsored atheism, both philosophically and or in practice. And does it matter? Is the difference important? Eli, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, in practice, the difference is really simple. It's really easy to distinguish. State-sponsored atheism is churches are not allowed to exist. You can't have a church. You can't worship a god. Don't talk about a god. That's state-sponsored atheism. Secular government is, we're not touching that. Do what you want. We're going to leave our hands out of it. And philosophically, I think that's the best practice, because, you know, we all have our individual beliefs. Like, you know, I believe that religion potentiates harm that is not otherwise, you know, potentiated without providing any benefit. But not all people believe that. So they have the right to, you know, believe what they believe, and that the government shouldn't be, you know, the separation of church and state is that the government cannot prevent anybody from believing what they want to believe. And in practice, state-sponsored atheism would be the exact opposite of that. That would be the violation of that, you know, First Amendment. And it's so like frustrating to see people like Ryan Walters, where they're like, no, like not allowing my religion in schools, or not allowing me to you know, have my religion as a state-sponsored religion is a violation of my freedom, because that's what I want. But they don't see it the other way. It's so strange to me. It's kind of infuriating.
The old persecution complex.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The victim mentality.
Right. Phoebe, what are your thoughts on that?
Two countries come to mind. One is Turkey, as founded by Ataturk, is a secular nation. The Constitution of Turkey is a secular constitution. The current president of Turkey may be doing everything in his power to undo what Ataturk did, but Turkey constitutionally is a secular society. France is a secular country, as far as it goes. So those two countries come to mind. Problem is, state-sponsored atheism is usually associated with the following kinds of countries: the USSR, the People's Republic of China, and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. And when you balance those two out, the French Fifth Republic and the Ataturk-founded state of Turkey versus the USSR, the People's Republic of China, and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, there really isn't that much that they've got in common. I mean, in France, public education does not allow religion. That's not state atheism, that's secularism.
Right, right.
You can hold whatever view you want. It doesn't matter. You just can't take it into the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
In North Korea, how dare you go to church, have a Bible, and believe in a god? The only leader is the Kim family.
So are you saying that the difference, so that the evidence seems to support the idea that a secular government would be the better choice?
A secular government is, in my opinion here, the freest type of government.
Mm-hmm.
Being British and coming from an Anglican country where the law states that you must have Anglican instruction 5 times a week in school every morning, versus in France where you just get on with lessons. I'll take it the French way any day of the week, thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm with you there.
Yeah.
But it was growing up in Britain, it was Anglican instruction 5 every morning for half an hour. You would have the local reverend would come round and and that's required unless you're a Roman Catholic school or a specific different religious school. I went to a church in the school. It was Anglican instruction 5 days a week.
Were you a believer back then, or were you always a non-believer?
I'm Jewish. So it was a very weird thing getting Anglican instruction and going back to a Jewish home.
Infidel, what's your thoughts on that?
I have to say that when it comes down to an atheistic government, I'm not even sure how you base something around the lack of something. You know, to base a government around the lack of believing in something just seems, you know, I hate to use the overused phrase, but we're all going to start a club of not collecting stamps. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. It doesn't add up. Now, secular, I agree. And I think that a secular government may have an advantage and a right to step in more than, and that's where my concern becomes with the idea of, okay, we're just going to stay out of religion, because we see that desire to not get involved. We see children who end up dead because their parents pray for them rather than bring them to the hospital and to be treated of something relatively simple, even like diabetes. So when it comes down to that separation, obviously it's not absolute. And whatever that is, that really is something that a secular society does have a responsibility to take a look at. Now, how do we do that is always going to be the problem. But it really does boil down to a secular society is the way to go. And I don't even know what an atheist society would look like. So I would just have to guess and make it up, which could be fun, but I think that's another story, Scott.
Okay. Well, I think at the very least, we all agreed that the idea that there is state-sponsored atheism being promoted in Oklahoma is, well, bullshit,
it's
to be frank.
Like, I don't mean to sound rude here, but it's fucking Oklahoma. It's not going to be the bastion of atheism anytime soon. I'm sorry, but it's just not. US Census data from 2020 backs me up here. I mean, for crying out loud, there are a large and high proportion of religious people in the state of Oklahoma, and that ain't changing anytime soon.
No, sure isn't.
No.
Well, that's as good a place as any, I think, to stop for this segment, Phoebe. And if you want more Phoebe Rose in your life, click up here.